was getting ready to do some chores here in the chicken yard this morning, and I realized we haven't done a more thorough update on the current status of our chicken composting system, how the design has evolved, what sort of lessons have been learned, where things are right now, especially as we come into the hotter summer months. So I'm going to go in depth with an update on our chicken composting system here in the summer of 2020. The first news to share is we recently brought in 25 more hens. We need to cull some of our older hens from the flock, but a lot of these red hens with the white dots on them, they came from a pretty unfortunate farm situation. We were able to get them very low cost. They're 1 year old. When we brought them back, it was clear they hadn't ever really seen green grass. We brought some of that to them in the car before we brought them out to the yard, and a number of them had a hard time figuring out what to do with it. But what's beautiful is within a week of being here, they are really getting on board. They've been enjoying the sprouted whole grains, the fresh water, and all of the compost. A couple of them are starting to figure out what it means to kick apart compost and get involved. So welcome, new friends. We are excited to have you for the rest of your lives here. The composting flow pipeline hasn't changed all that dramatically, but it's gotten a little bit more thought out. You can see this back area, which we've shown in other videos. This is where we tend to cache large amounts of carbon. So for example, if we get a truckload of leaf bags, or we get a huge order of sawdust, or wood chips get delivered, we tend to bank that back in here. So there's like a huge absorbent carbon base, and this is where we'll drop raw food scraps in first. And I've got a full truckload of scraps to dump today. You can see this is where we dumped a little ways back. So it's basically a catch-all. It's a place to begin. They get to work on it, especially in the summer months. We want the most spread out food so it stays cool the longest. They can work on it the longest. As they're losing interest and it's starting to decompose, we can start to scoop the older food, getting some leaves and sawdust with it and piling it up here. Once it's here, they can kick it apart again a little bit more. Sasha will add some sprouted grains to this pile to bring their interest back to it. And then we'll load it up with a wheelbarrow and bring it the short distance to dump it. Pardon the buckets, but that's where we keep our soaked grain. She'll dump it here, right in front of this high tunnel. Now, if you followed the channel closely for a while, you know that this is what we use for the winter months so that it stays warm and thawed out and they can be relaxed and comfortable. We're now storing some dried bales, some sand, diatomaceous earth, and grit and things like that for the hens in here so it's out of the rain. And soon enough, we're going to leave this pathway open, but we're going to fence off the sides of this and grow vining crops to feed our chickens, but leave the middle so they can use it as a dust bath. But you can see this is where we dump that compost. So it goes from raw food scraps with the browns to around here. This is the first place where we start to test for or perceive for issues. So if it smells bad here, we add a lot more carbon, either flake in some hay or add in more sawdust and leaves. So we're trying to get it so that it smells mild and gentle, warm, but not sour here. And then we informally pile it up. You can see every few days, basically, we make a pile, they kick it apart, goes down slope. That was yesterday's pile. Sasha built up a bunch of piles. By the time it's here, we're about a week in, 10 days in, from raw food scraps and sawdust. And you can see it's well on its way to breaking down. 2 more bounces from to there. Again, they kick it apart. At each of these stages, if for some reason we get hit with a smell of, ooh, that smells like sulfur or ammonia or something is off, we add more carbon. We pile it up, they kick it apart. Very, very simple. You can see we use boards screwed together as dividers. We also use milk crates. In the summer months, we turn the milk crates upside down so that more air can get into the compost. One last turn, and then the finishing bay is here. And this is compost that now has rested, in this case, for about 30 to 40 days. And this is ready. So this has gone through the pipeline. This is about 50 days in total. My friend, you can test if you want. Beautiful stuff. And our chickens are pretty happy about it. Looks like some much needed rain is about ready to come in, so I'm gonna get on with it and move the old scraps that have been here for a few days and consolidate them. Doesn't have to be complete and thorough, just basically taking the old and moving it so that it's starting to get ready to tumble down slope through that pipeline and eventually leave and go on to the gardens. Yesterday's compost pickup was really nice. In fact, we picked up another new restaurant that we're getting from. And so we can do a little triage on these. You know, for example, here's one that's all coffee grinds. That goes into its own composting system. We have a compost over here that has black soldier fly larvae, so we hopefully are growing those out, we'll see. But different food scraps in here, ideally high quality. We try to get the best we can, but we're not gonna be super picky. If people are willing to eat what comes out of the restaurant, we're willing to work with it if need be, especially in these times. And then yesterday I did some really thorough but fast, well, let's say fast and not as thorough, weeding up at the main 6-acre nursery, pulling grasses, garlic mustard, cleavers and that kind of stuff, and brought all of this, which we'll load into the walkways. I'll show you. This container seems to be almost entirely filled with sprouted potatoes, so we'll lay these out in a crate and let them continue to sprout, see how they do, and if we plant out all our potatoes and have room for some more, maybe we'll do that. It seems like a higher value than trying to feed these to our chickens because I don't think they'll like these. So there's a little bit of work going through this and figuring out, well, that goes to the chickens, or that goes here, or that goes there. Sometimes maybe that's food for us for the next winter. We'll see. If I'd been a little bit more on top of it, I would have seen that 2 of these buckets were almost entirely onions. That definitely could have been dumped elsewhere. Maybe could have been dumped and actually planted out so we could have onion seed to grow out, or to just let naturalize or put around young fruit trees. It's not going to poison our hens. They know to avoid it, but it isn't exactly what they want. So that's part of the deal with this, is you get material that really isn't ideal, and you figure out these like alternative forks in the waste stream. It's not all dumped in the chicken yard, 5-gallon buckets of coffee grinds and avocado pits. You'd really stress your hens out if you just dumped it all like I did. No, they'll figure it out. You can see they just go for what they know works. They're hitting the broccoli, and they're really wailing on the greens for these little turnips. And the onions will basically just get digested by earthworms eventually. The key as we get into hot weather really is to spread out the incoming food scraps nice and wide so it doesn't just cook right away. We want them to have free choice on as much of the fresh material as possible. Fresh as in air quotes, fresh enough for our hens to be happy with. And that really deep carbon diaper underneath, that carbon sponge, let's say, is so important too, because as we're getting, this rain is starting to get heavier and heavier, excess nutrient can wash through this, and we want to absorb that into something meaningful, not put it into waterways. So we've got about 2 feet of sawdust and leaf bags underneath this, so we know every last drop's going to stay in the system and be able to tumble down. And you can see that bucket was extra juicy, and there's the sawdust doing the work it needs to do. So juices collected. Our hens are off to a really nice morning. All sorts of great material coming in. Maybe to your eye this looks really gross, but to the chickens this is basically heaven just fell out of the sky. And this is part of the recipe for why there was no real stress between our hens and these new hens when they came in. When there is not resource scarcity, the chickens all can get along really well. Our old hens, our new hens, everybody's just folding together and having fun because there's food everywhere. There's nothing to get stressed out about. Meats and greens for our good friends. Feels so nice to see them enjoying a absolute all-you-can-eat buffet with the light drizzle coming down from above. Now it's time to deliver a nice layer of pseudo-pasture. This little crew can't wait to get started on this part. So what we've learned over time is, just in the warm months, to not pile this up. If we make a huge heaping pile, it just cooks and they only can access the very outer bit. So what we'll do is lay this all out through the pathways. You can see we've done this in the past here. These are some of the stems that remain from the last rounds. Lots of hay and sawdust underneath here, so we'll let them work it for a while and then we can flip it, turn it, open it up, and they can work it some more. But lots of flowers, lots of greens, lots of seeds that could have landed in our nursery that will now land in our chickens' bellies. That feels so good to see. Deep, fresh pasture for our hens. Two quick notes on this that I want to offer up. Number one, a strong recommendation is to not chop and shred the greens that you bring to your hens. If they're in their full form, the hens can better identify them and decide what they want. You don't want to blend in and make a mash out of it. They rot down too quickly. This material is actually pretty warm already just from sitting on the truck one night. It's kind of crazy. Number two, if you're pulling weeds or you're sourcing greens for your hens, if you're not sure if it's good for your hens, just look up edibility for people. So basically everything in here, I just cross-referenced, like, yeah, okay, technically we could eat that or make a medicine from it. If it's not ripped apart or shredded or sent through a lawnmower or a chipper, the hens can differentiate. So if you accidentally put in some buttercup or something else that would not be good for the hens, they can see it and avoid it. And they'll work on this fresh green pasture for a few days. We'll flip it once in a while just to give them access to the greens that were underneath. And then at a certain point, we'll take all that material and start bringing it this way to fold it in as an enzymatically very alive part of this composting system. So it's not just sawdust and food scraps, it's also all the probiotics and life that grows on those greens. It's definitely a lot of work to do a system like this, but having hens that are incredibly content and healthy and happy, low stress, just a lot of good days for them, that feels so worth it. And it's important for us to remember and remind you that all of this work does translate into higher quality eggs for sure. So this effort goes directly into our bodies and the folks that we love that we share these eggs with. Also, 100% of what you saw in this video was obviously free and coming from waste streams, weeds that we needed to pull from other beds and areas, compost that was going towards the waste stream, maybe to a dump. So that's pretty valuable too. All right, Mrs. Ladies, enjoy your morning, have fun. I'll go wash the buckets. I know you offered to wash them this time, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway.